让我们继续。
But why do I have this line of code here? The correct spelling is indeed standardio.h, stdio.h, and they're angled brackets this time, so that's a little new. There's a hash and then an include keyword. If you don't know what something is, there's not really that much harm in just getting rid of it and see what happens. So let me delete that line. Let me go back to my terminal window, clear the screen, and then run make hello again. And let's try compiling this program now without that first line. Why? I don't understand it, so let's see what happens. All right, here's yet another error, but let's see. Hello.c, line 5, character 5, so it's pretty early on, error, implicitly declaring library function printf with type int and then ... So implicitly declaring library function printf. So this is very cryptic sounding. You'll get better at understanding phrases like these, but apparently I do need the include line for standardio.h, but why? Based on this symptom, what might your instinct be for what that first line of code is doing for us in the first place? Why intuitively must it be there? Exactly, it's like importing a library so that you can do things like print things out on the screen. Now in Scratch, you didn't have to do this for most of the puzzle pieces, but you might recall that partway through week 0, I went to the extensions button at the bottom left of the Scratch screen and I imported some extra puzzle pieces for text to speech that gave us the sort of creepy humanized voice that actually came out of the cat's mouth. Well, that was like adding a library, code that someone else wrote. In that case, it was a third party, but I gave myself access to it. Same here. Turns out that you don't really get printf automatically in C. You have to include a so-called header file that declares that function to exist. Now, the reason for this historically is just efficiency. Back in the day when computers were really slower and resource constrained, you don't want to just give yourself access to the entire kitchen sink of functionality. You only want to include only the functions you actually care about. Nowadays, it's sort of a copy-paste step because you almost always want to print something out on the screen, at least when writing programs like these. But these so-called header files contain enough information about all of the functions in what's called the standard.
这里说的意思就是说，这个头文件，它其实就是我们这个 printf 这个函数，它其实是在这个文件里面定义的。我们用 include 包含，意思就是把这个文件包含进来，然后它因为写在我们的一个 C 语言程序的前面，源代码的前面，所以一般叫它头文件。然后这个 standardio 这个它是相当于是一个库，然后这个库里面定义了 printf 这个函数，这里就有一点点那种代码设计思维。就是说，因为我们 printf 是一个非常常用的操作，然后我们把它封装到一个库里面，以便我们在不同的程序只需要去包含它，就可以直接调用这个函数，而不需要把它的代码 copy 来 copy 去。然后我们在 VS Code 里面，在 Mac 系统下面按住 Command，如果是在 Windows 下面按住 Control， 这里会变成一个有下划线的链接，然后点过去的话，它是这个库的里面的定义，然后我们搜一下 printf 的话，可以看到printf 的函数是定义在这个地方当然这个库里面还有很多其他的函数。然后呢，这门课有一个专门针对这门课它做的一个库，是这个 CS50。就是这门课它自己有一个库，是这个 CS50 这个库。然后这个库它因为我们现在是处理输出嘛，然后它还有处理输入，但处理输入这对于我们新手来说可能比较麻烦。然后它这个库帮我们定义好了一些可以帮我们处理各种类型输入的函数，一会老师也会讲它要怎么用。然后它包含在 CS50 这个库里面，然后如果你是用线上老师提供的那个 VS Code 的环境的话，是不需要做额外操作就可以直接使用这个库。但是如果我们是在本地上运行的话， 可能需要把这个库安装一下然后可以在 GitHub 上面找到这个库然后下面有它的安装步骤，就是我们把它下载下来，然后解压缩，然后进到这个文件夹里面，然后执行这行代码做编译命令做编译然后因为我已经安装了，所以在这边就不演示了。然后但是当然有问题的话，可以在评论区或者到 GitHub 上面去问我然后我在这边是可以直接使用的。然后我现在先找一个那个有这个有用到它这个库的文件，然后来给大家讲一下在本地我们怎么去编译因为就是直接去编译它，像我们 make debug 直接 make debug 的话它会报这个 guessstring 这个函数它是在这个 CS50 库里面，然后现在直接 make debug 的话，它会报一个找不到这个函数的错，然后我们这里应该用这行原始的命令，这个 make 它实际执行的这个命令使用它，然后再加上一个-l CS50，-l 的意思是 link， 就是然后 CS50 是这个库的名字 ，link-l 这个参数意思是把 CS50 这个本地库给链接进来，跟我们的源代码一起做编译然后这时候它就可以编译成功然后接下去呢，说一下这门课还给我们提供了一个非常有用的材料就是这个手册。这个手册的话，它就帮我们列举了C语言里面所有的库，还有那个每个库里面的函数的用法。然后它这里有一个 less comfortable 的选项是针对我们初学者我们把它打开的话，它这里只会留下常用的库跟常用的函数。然后我们点进某个函数进去看的话，它也是一样，每一个块都有一个 less comfortable 的选项。然后我们把它关掉的话，它显示的是一个比较术语化的一个说明。当然，如果我们把它打开，它就是一种比较说人话面向我们初学者的一种解释，可以让我们更好的去接受它它这个就是这门课给我们提供了一个非常好的学习C语言的参考材料然后大家可以就是在后续的学习中用这个手册辅助你去学习。然后前面还忘记讲了一点这个分号然后 C 它是一个强制分号的一个语言，然后有的语言可能不需要我们写分号。然后这个分号在哪里写的像这些地方我们是不需要写的这里可以简单的先用这么简单的，就是说我们在用大括号表示的里面，它是一个区块，然后在这个区块里面的每一个语句，就这里表示其实就是一个完整的执行语句，就告诉了程序说我要输出，然后这件事情就结束了。这时候我们就需要一个分号我们可以理解为在这个每一个大括号括起来的块里面都是每一句完整的语句后面都是需要分号的。然后大家后面如果程序写的多了，自然也就知道哪个地方需要分号，哪个地方不需要，可以先这么简单的记忆。然后接下去老师讲一下这个 CS50 这个函数，这个库函数里面这些函数大概是怎么来去使用。
You with some functions like get char for get a single character from the user's keyboard, get int to get an integer from the user's keyboard, get string to get a sequence of text from the user's keyboard, and a bunch of others as well. So let's actually use some of these functions, how about, by revisiting really the second program we wrote in Scratch last time, which adds some input to the output. So first version of Scratch was just hello world, said the same thing every time you click the green flag. Version 2, recall, though, did this. It asked the user, what's your name? And then that somehow gave it back a return variable, a return value, we called it, And we then joined hello and that name to say something a little more interesting on the screen. So what did that model look like? Same thing as before. We've got a function in the middle, where function is like the code implementation of our algorithm. That takes in one or more arguments, like what is it you want to say on the screen ultimately. And return value in this case is going to be actually a value that comes back. So in the case of getting input, we can consider this ask block again, like last week. The input to it is whatever words of English you want to ask the user. And then it returns a value. And this was called by default in MIT's world answer, that we'll see in C. You can call these return values anything you want ultimately in variables. But this is different from a side effect. A side effect is just something visual often that happens on the screen, like the speech bubble or hello world. A return value is actually a value you get back from a function that you can use or reuse. So how do we convert this scratch block from last week to C code this week? Well, if you want to ask the user for something like their name, you can do this. You use a CS50 function called getString, and you use the parentheses to represent, here comes the inputs there too. You can then put the sentence you want to ask the user, quote unquote, what's your name? But you do indeed need the quotes literally in C, so I'll go ahead and add those as well. Subtle, but I've deliberately included a space after the question mark, but before the double quote, just so that the cursor moves one step over, because in this case, we're not going to get a special speech box like we did in Scratch. It's just going to leave the cursor where it is. So we'll see that aesthetically, that just moves the blinking cursor one space after the sentence on the screen. All right, but the catch is with Scratch, we just automatically got back the answer from the user in a special variable called answer. In C, you're going to have to be a little more specific. In C, if you want to get back a return value from a function like getString, you have to use an equal sign and then the name of a variable on the left. The choice of variables is up to you. I could have called this anything, X, Y, Z. I'm going to more descriptively call it answer for parity with what MIT did with Scratch. But notice that this doesn't represent equality per se. This is assignment in this case. So in C, when you use a single equal sign, that means copy the value on the right over to the value on the left, from right to left. So what does this do for us? Well, if getString is a function that prompts the user with quote unquote, what's your name? And it has, I claim, a return value, that means it kind of hands me back some value, but it's up to me in C to do something with that value. So if I want to copy that value into a variable that I can use and reuse, I use an equal sign, and I invent on the left-hand side of that equal sign any variable name I want. There's certain rules, there's certain conventions, but generally if you use a single word with all lowercase, you're in good shape. But C is a little more pedantic than that, and those of you who have programmed before might not be used to this, for instance, in Python, which is a world we'll get to in a few weeks. You also have to tell C what type of value you're storing. So if I do want a string of text from the user, so not an integer, not a single character, I want a whole string of text, like a phrase, a sentence, a name in this case, I have to tell C that this variable is of type string. So it's a little wordy, but you get used to it, and you just have to be precise. You're informing the computer what type of value is going in this variable. All right, it's so close to being correct, but I have omitted something that's annoyingly important still. What's missing still? Yeah. So semicolon. This is a statement. This is like a full thought, if you will, in code. I do need to end it ultimately with the semicolon at the end there. All right, so this was more of a mouthful, but let's try using this in now my code. Let me go back to VS Code, where I have version 0 of my code here. Let me go ahead and include one other file at the top of hello.c, namely include cs50.h, so that I have access now to getString and anything else I might want. Now let me go ahead and add a line of code here inside of these curly braces. And let me go ahead and do this. String answer equals getString, quote unquote, what's your name, question mark. I'm going to add an extra space before the double quote. I'm going to indeed end my thought with a semicolon. And now let me deliberately make a mistake just to make a point here. Let me now try changing hello world to hello, comma, answer. All right, now perhaps, even though this is some new lines of code, you can see where I've erred already, but let me try making this program now. So far, so good. So no error messages. So that's a good thing. Let me go ahead and run /hello, and you'll see the prompt. What's your name? Question mark. And notice the cursor is indeed one space to the right, just because I thought it would look prettier to put a little blank space there, as opposed to leaving it right after the question mark. Let me type my name, but even if you've never programmed before, I have screwed up here. What are we going to see on the screen when I hit enter? Yeah, hello answer, most likely. Why? Because the computer is going to take me literally. And if I say, quote unquote, hello answer, that is the string of text followed by a new line that's going to be outputted to the screen. So we need some way of actually plugging answer into this line of code. It's not quite as simple as Scratch, where you could just grab like a second say block and drag and drop the variable there. We actually need a new syntax, and it's going to look weird at first, but it is everywhere in software nowadays, especially in the world of C and certain other languages. So let me go ahead and propose that. I solve it as follows. Well, back when we did this in Scratch, remember that the most elegant solution was this here. We used the say block still, which is going to be analogous to printf today. But I used the join puzzle piece in Scratch to combine hello, comma, space, and then the name of the human. So how do we translate this code to C? Well, it's going to look a little different now. I'm going to start with printf with some parentheses and a semicolon representing the say block. But how do I now do this joining? This is where the puzzle pieces don't quite translate perfectly. This would be the way to do this. You put hello, comma, and then a placeholder. So this is what's known as a format code in C, specifically for printf, and it just means this is a placeholder for a string. Again, a string is just text. So this means, hey computer, print out literally hello, comma, space, and then not literally %s. %s is treated specially to mean plug in some value here. All right, so what else do I still need? Well, this is still some text, so I'm still going to surround the whole thing with double quotes. I'm still going to include my \n just to keep things tidy and move the cursor to the next line. So the last step here in C is to somehow join the answer with that word hello. And the way you do this is with printf, passing it not one argument, which is what I keep doing. I keep passing it one string of text, quote unquote. I'm going to now add a comma and then the name of the value that I want printf to go back and plug into that %s. And printf is just smart about this. If you have 1%s and one additional argument after a comma, it just does from right to left, it plugs it in. If you have 2%s's and two variables after the comma, that's okay too. If you separate them with commas, it'll plug the first into the first %s and the second variable into the second %s. So it's just left to right order of operations. It's not as pretty or as simple as this, but this is how it's done in C. All right, let me...
这里老师讲了一个这个 CS50 它提供的这个 getString 的用法然后介绍了其他一些的语法。首先我们去这里是相当于是一个声明了一个叫 answer 的变量然后等于号在这里不是我们四值运算里面的等于号，它是一个赋值操作就相当于 getString 它是从你的屏幕获取一个输入，然后把你输入的东西存到这个 answer 上面然后这个 answer 就等于你屏幕输入的这个东西了然后如果我们要表示等于的话，我们要用两个等于号在编程，很多编程语言都是这样规定的就是一个等于号代表了赋值向某一个变量存一个东西，然后两个等于号是相等的意思然后在 C 里面 C 是一个静态类型的语言意思就是说它每一个变量都必须声明它的类型，包括我们后面如果是定义函数，然后在函数里面定义参数的话，也需要去声明它的类型然后我这里必须要说的是在 C 里面它是没有 string 这个类型的。我第一次看老师讲的时候，我心里也了一下，C 有这个 string 这个类型的，在我的印象里好像没有然后为防我的印象出错，我特地去查了一下C 里面确实是没有 string 这个类型的。string 这个类型应该是老师为了方便我们初学者接受，然后在这个 CS50 这个库里面定义的。然后我看到这门课后面的内容也会讲这个事情，所以大家现在只需要知道 C 里面是没有 string 这个类型的。string 其实是这门课的这个库里面 定义的这样就可以了。然后后面遇到了我们再来讲这个事情。然后这里呢这个 printf有了一个新的用法，就是我们这里用百分号，然后 s 它是一个 string 的意思，然后百分号 s 代表了这里是一个字符串的占位符。然后我们此时往 printf 传入第二个参数，就是我们这个 answer 它就会把这个占位符给替换掉，输出的时候会输出 hello， 然后把 answer 里面存的这个东西接到后面去然后假如说我们要接上更多的东西，我们就是在后面接更多的变量它会按顺序的去替换百分号s 这个占位符。然后如果我们是真的要输出百分号不把它当成一个占位符，我们就想输出百分号的话我们需要用2个百分号就意思就是说我们要在这里面放2个百分号，此时我们输出的是1个百分号然后另外呢，除了 string 当然 string 不是C固有的类型我们还有很多其他的类型这些等等等等然后如果我们这个变量不是 string 这个类型是其他的类型，我们这里要替换成对应的比如说你是一个 int 的话你是一个数字，那你这里的占位符应该替换成百分号 d 就是每一个类型其实都有它对应的一个占位符，然后大家可以通过相关的手册去了解。然后下一期我们再来看一下这个条件语句循环这些东西。然后应该还有一期视频就差不多了，然后再加上一期来给大家讲课后的作业，然后这一节课应该差不多。然后谢谢大家。